Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu wa ashrafil mursaleen, wa assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Beloved guests, it's my distinct honor to address you here today. The topic that we'll be speaking about, or I'll be speaking about, is a very interesting topic. It's a topic entitled The Crusades and the Life of Salahuddin Ayubi. I take great excitement, I take great inspiration and motivation from this topic, and I hope that I'll be able to share some of that with you today. When we think about the Crusades, what do we think about? We envisage in our mind armies on the desert floor with sand rising above in the sky. We envisage in our minds Masjid al-Aqsa. We think about the Dome of the Rock. But I feel this is somehow erroneous. When reading Dr. Ali Salabi's work, his 3-volume classic, it is interesting to see that the idea of the Crusades started a long time before the idea of Jerusalem and the idea of conquering Jerusalem. At the advent of Islam, at the time of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, there were minor movements, anti-Islamic movements taking place against the spread of our deen, against the rise of Islam. This is where we can see the crusading initiation occurring. In the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, during his Khalifa, he moved to the lands close to the Byzantine Empire, where he was liberating those lands, liberating the people from their Byzantine masters. He was liberating both the lands and liberating both their minds. Just as the advent of Islam came, Islam was there at the hand of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to liberate minds, to enlighten minds. And the same thing was done by Umar ibn al-Khattab. The Byzantines started to attack Muslim lands, be it Syria, Iraq, Anatolia, which is current-day Turkey, Egypt, and many other North African countries. Western Europe at the time was in disarray. It was just at the end of the collapse of the Roman Empire. Western Europe, Western Christianity was in disarray, and the Eastern Orthodox Christianity was rising. And this was in terms of the Byzantine Empire. This was in terms of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Western Europe was spiritually in disarray, economically and morally in disarray. There was this great schism between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholicism. Basically, the leaders of Western Europe were looking for any reason to attack the Muslims, to take their land and to take their wealth. It is clear by what I'm trying to say that the Crusades was not so much of a religious idea or a religious endeavor, but more of a colonialistic endeavor. It was an idea where you had Western Christians trying to take the lands of the Muslims for their own materialistic gain. Pope Urban II, he was the individual that we can speak about in history as the individual that spearheaded the propaganda campaign against the Muslims during this era. You see, Western Europe was very emboldened. They were emboldened by the fall of the Andalusian Empire in Spain. And this was around 478 after Hijrah. So what Pope Urban II started to do was he started to spread a lot of false information. Disinformation, if you may. He was saying that the Seljuk Turks, which was bordering the Byzantine Empire, was starting to attack the Byzantine Empire. This type of warmongering, this type of false information is similar to what we see today. At a very interesting council called the Council of Clermont in south of France, Pope Urban gave a very emotive speech. He gave a very impassioned speech. And the historian Gustave Le Bon, in his book, La Civilisation des Arabes, stated that when this occurred, it was as if it was an active sense of insanity. He said that the Christians listening over there had one thing in their heart, and they said, God wills it. God wills it for us to march to the Holy Land. Robert the monk basically stated that 300,000 people Christians at the conference of Clermont were moved by the Pope's speech, the Pope's propaganda. There was an individual called Peter the Hermit, and he was an individual that kind of swore off the world, but he was a mouthpiece for the propaganda campaign as well. And he basically stated such impassioned speeches that the Christians went as far as burning iron crosses in their chest. This was the environment that we need to think about, the environment that preceded the First Crusade. What is interesting for us to remember here is not what the enemies of Islam were doing to prepare for the Crusades. What the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what were the Muslims doing to predict the Crusades, to foresee it and to prepare for it? At the time, the Fatimid Empire were in competition with the Abbasid Empire in the Muslim lands. One being in Egypt, the one being in Baghdad. For 2 entire years, this propaganda campaign was going on, and the Fatimids and the Abbasids did not pick up on it. 2 years of propaganda, and nothing was done about it. You ask yourself why this was the case. The reason for it was because they were too busy sorting out the divisions amongst themselves, too busy arguing amongst each other to see the fire of the Europeans coming about. The First Crusade then occurred, and the Christians took many lands. The most important of it was Edessa, which was a land in Armenia just above Syria, near to Turkey. This was the point of contact between the Crusaders and the Muslims. It was a mighty blow for the Muslims at the time. They continued, they took Tripoli, they took Antioch, they took Jerusalem, and they definitely took advantage of the weakening Muslims at that time, or the weak Muslims at the time. There was a juristic scholar named Ali ibn Tahir as-Sulani, and he makes a comment. Notice that I said it was a juristic scholar. It was a scholar of the time making a comment about the situation of the Muslims, a critical comment. Ali ibn Tahir as-Sulani made a statement, and he said that it was not because of the strength of the Crusaders that they succeeded in the First Crusade. He said that it was because of the weakness of the Muslims in their religion that the First Crusade was a success. What did he advise the Muslims of the time to do? He advised the Muslims of the time to turn to Allah, to purify your souls, to turn to the Book of Allah, to forgive others, and to strive in the cause of Allah. This is what his advice was to the weakening Muslims at the time. And he stuck to an important Arabic saying. And the saying goes that in times of war, all grudges should be forgotten. This, alhamdulillah, all changed in about 503 after Hijrah, where the Muslim Ummah saw the rise of extremely dynamic leaders that I'm sure a lot of us have not even heard about. And I must say that it is only our loss that we have not heard about these leaders. Leaders like Maudud ibn al-Tuntash from Mosul. He was an Islamic leader that called upon a united Islamic front of Turks, Persians, Seljuks, and Armenians. What he did was he tried to take back Edessa, the land that I just spoke about. He tried to besiege Edessa on 2 different occasions. Unfortunately, he failed on both occasions. However, a very pinnacle point of this war is when at Al-Sinabra, which is in modern-day Palestine, he changed the dynamic of the war from an offensive to a defensive, from an offensive rather than a defensive stance of the Muslims. The Muslims had an extremely successful victory at Al-Sinabra, and this emboldened them, this increased their confidence, and it took the tide of the crusading times to a different stroke. Let me tell you just about Maudud ibn Tuntash, a testament to his life. After his 2 failed attempts at Edessa, but his resounding victory at Al-Sinabra, he was retiring in the Jami Mosque in Damascus. He was praying, he came outside with his friend. And what happened was, as he was walking, one of the rebels at the time, he was a Batini heretic, he jumped on Maudud ibn Tuntash's back and stabbed him a couple of times, trying to assassinate him. Maudud was mortally wounded, but not dead at the time. His friend that was close by him rushed him to the house and said to him, "Please, break your fast," because he was fasting at the time. "Break your fast, your body is very, very weak." Maudud, knowing that probably the end was near, replied to his friend saying, "I cannot meet my Lord except in a state of fasting." SubhanAllah. These are the quality of our leaders of the past. Another interesting individual is Imamuddin Zinki from Mosul and Aleppo in Syria. Imamuddin Zinki was a Turk, and he made it his life's duty to try and take back Edessa and turn the tide on the Crusaders. He once again, at that time, called for the unity of the Muslims, and the Muslims responded, alhamdulillah. And he was managed to take Edessa, alhamdulillah. And this was a harbinger for the Second Crusade. The enemies of Islam at the time, the Crusaders, could not fathom how they managed to lose Edessa. And they sent the King of France with his soldiers, the King of Germany with his soldiers. It was Conrad III and King Louis. And they sent their forces of hundreds of thousands of soldiers to retake Edessa. Imamuddin Zinki at the time passed away, and his son Nuruddin Zinki took over. Nuruddin Zinki was a very pious man, a very brave, a very courageous leader. And he took the fight to the Crusaders. Nuruddin Zinki defended Damascus at the time when the Crusaders threatened Damascus. There's something interesting that I want to mention over here. At the time, Damascus was an ally of the Crusaders. And the Crusaders, despite having the ally of Damascus, backstabbed the leader of Damascus and attacked Damascus instead of Jerusalem. So ask yourselves the question, brothers. If the crusade was about the liberation of the Holy Lands for the Christians, why would they change the trajectory to Damascus instead of Jerusalem? Nuruddin Zinki said at that time that he learned a vital lesson from this occurrence. That indeed the crusading enterprise was not about religiosity, but one about colonialism. This was said by our leaders hundreds of thousands of years ago. Nuruddin Zinki then appointed a leader from Damascus. His name was Asad-Din Shirkuh. And he sent this ambassador of his to Egypt to aid Al-Adid, who was the emperor of Egypt at the time. Al-Adid sent Nuruddin a piece of hair of his wife. And he sent this hair because as a symbol to say, we cannot protect our women anymore. Please give us a helping hand. Please help us out. The Crusaders are at our door. Nuruddin saw this and responded to his plea. And he sent Shirkuh and Shirkuh's nephew to help the Egyptians. And Shirkuh's nephew's name was Salahuddin Ayyubi. Just a little note on Nuruddin Zinki. Nuruddin Zinki was Salahuddin Ayyubi's mentor. He tutored him, taught him Islamic studies, taught him the art of hunting, of archery, of horsemanship, and was his role model. Maulana Zahir Mahmud states and comments about the relationship between Nuruddin Zinki and Salahuddin Ayyubi. He says, great men produce great men. Men that surround themselves and women that surround themselves with people of substance, people of leadership and people of quality will take from them. And this is what Salahuddin Ayyubi did with Nuruddin Zinki. You know, at a very young age, Nuruddin saw the promise in Salahuddin. I believe Salahuddin was only about 30 years old to 32 years old. And Nuruddin Zinki made Salahuddin the head of the police of Damascus. Damascus was struggling at the time, struggling with crime. And here is this very young man, 30 years old to 32 years old, being the head of police of Damascus. He did such a stellar job that a famous poet, Hassan ibn Numair, makes mention of this. He speaks to the thieves of Damascus, and he says, wait, O thieves of Damascus, for I will tell you about someone, I will tell you something most sincere. I will tell you about someone that has come to your city who has the same name as Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. That same Yusuf was known for his beauty, cut the hands of the woman, making mention of the story of the queen that paraded Yusuf in front of the woman while they were cutting the fruit, and because of his beauty, the woman cut their hands. And this poet says that Yusuf cut the hands of the woman, this Yusuf cuts the hands of the thieves. This was mentioned in the poetry. At the death of Nuruddin al-Zinki, Salahuddin Ayyubi ascended the ladder and became the vizier of Egypt. After becoming the vizier of Egypt, he also started to take leadership in Syria. When consulting Sheikh Ihsan Hendricks about this topic about 2-3 days ago, he told me that at this pivotal point, when Salahuddin Ayyubi took the leadership over from Nuruddin al-Zinki, it showed the hikmah of Salahuddin Ayyubi. At the time, Nuruddin al-Zinki's sons were very young, and they were being pushed to take leadership by all the people around them that obviously wanted to take advantage of them, of the young age. Salahuddin at the time said, you guys need to wait. You guys are too young. I have been around your father and learned from your father more than you have. I will take lead for now, and under my rule, you will be safe. Sheikh Ihsan Hendricks says that this is a pivotal moment in the history of the Ummah at the time and shows the beautiful hikmah of Salahuddin Ayyubi. I will now just take some time to speak about Salahuddin Ayyubi and his history. At about 532 after Hijrah, Salahuddin Ayyubi was born in the fort of Tikrit, which is on the banks of the Tigris River near Baghdad. His father's name was Najmuddin Ayyubi, and he was a man of politics. His uncle, as I previously mentioned, was Asaduddin Shirku, and this was a man that was known for his military expertise. Look at the two people, the two male figures that were around Salahuddin Ayyubi at the time. A man very in-depth, his own father in the political world, and his uncle in the ways of the military. This was the environment that Salahuddin grew up in. Maulana Zahir Mahmud states that there wasn't a day that in Salahuddin's life where he could contemplate things that the expulsion of the Crusaders were not mentioned. This tells us makes a very interesting point. That to achieve something, you have to be busy with it. You have to engross yourself in it, and you have to prepare for it from a very young age. And this is the type of environment that nurtured Salahuddin Ayyubi. I just want to make mention a story of Salahuddin Ayyubi's mother. It makes mention that when Salahuddin was born, before he was born, his mother had a dream. And in the dream, she says that she had a dream, and in her womb she had one of the swords of Allah. This was a dream of the mother of Salahuddin Ayyubi. Based upon my historical studies, I've always noticed that it's our beloved mothers that always have these impassionate dreams. The dreams of the mother of Imam Bukhari, the dreams of the mother of Anas bin Malik. These are interesting dreams. Our mothers have a link, a spiritual link that we need to respect. Now, Salahuddin Ayyubi came from a Kurdish family, a very noble Kurdish family. He was not an Arab, he was not a Persian, he was not a Turk. He was a Kurd. And his family originally stemmed from Azerbaijan. Salahuddin loved the scholars. He loved reading about fiqh, he loved reading about hadith, and at a very young age he became a hafiz of Quran. He surrounded himself with people of substance and people of purpose. I just want to make mention of some of his personality traits and some of the things that he occupied himself with. On the front of Aqidah, he was given a book by Kutubuddin Nisiburi, which he learned and he memorized well. He taught it to his children very often. Ibn Shaddad, who is the biography of Salahuddin, and it is said about Ibn Shaddad that his biography ended when Salahuddin passed away, because Ibn Shaddad was with him when he passed away. And Ibn Shaddad states that he often used to see Salahuddin teach this book to his students, to his sons. With regards to namaz, with regards to prayer, Ibn Shaddad mentions that Salahuddin loved to pray Salah in Jumu'ah. He loved to pray Salah in congregation, to such a point that when his health was ailing, he would request for an imam to come to his room to lead him in Salah. Often during his military campaigns, he would dismount from his horse and perform Salah on the floor. Salahuddin Ayyubi is one that had a very soft heart. He was not one that was very hard-hearted and staunch. Ibn Shaddad mentions that on listening to the Quran, very often his eyes would fill with tears. Ibn Shaddad mentions that he loved to listen to the Quran, and sometimes for the Jumu'ah, he would request and he would choose the different qari to recite the Quran. He also loved to read hadith. He had so much respect for the hadith that Ibn Shaddad mentions that upon hearing a hadith, he would sit down and not stand up. He would ask people who are with him to sit down out of respect for the hadith and the divine knowledge that was being shared with him. One of the hallmarks of characteristics of Salahuddin Ayyubi was his generosity. It's mentioned in the history books that he would give in times of plenty and he would give in times of difficulty. Ibn Shaddad mentions that he was riding with Salahuddin one day, and Salahuddin stated, Ibn Shaddad, it may be that there is someone in the world whose esteem for money has little value as the dust on the earth. And Ibn Shaddad mentions that he knew that he was referring to himself. Another quality is forbearance. Many instances, Salahuddin did not enjoy sound health. He had many sicknesses, many skin-related problems, and one that is mentioned in the books is that he always used to get pustules on his body. He always used to get blisters that filled with pus that was extremely painful. And when he was questioned about this, he always said the same thing, showing beautiful patience and forbearance. He stated to his companions, he said, when I'm riding my horse in the path of God, I don't feel the pain of the pustules. It's only when I dismount and I go back to rest when I feel the pains that I am suffering. During the latter part, and during a case of severe illness that Salahuddin had, he was very weak, very miserable. He was in a great amount of pain, and he asked for a glass of water. The individual that brought the glass of water brought it and it was too cold. The second individual brought a glass of water and it was too warm. And in this state of misery, all that Salahuddin Ayyubi, who was the king at the time, stated was, Subhanallah, is there perhaps nobody is available to bring the glass of water with the right temperature. I know this seems like something trivial, but at the time, in a state of difficulty and misery and pain, to show that type of decorum, to show that type of patience, this brought Ibn Shaddad and the people around him to tears. Salahuddin was a dynamic leader. You know, besides having the company of beneficial people, he also pioneered the entity of a mobile clinic in war. He also pioneered the ideas of building hospitals at particular spots on earth. Sheikh Ihsan Hendricks told me a story about Salahuddin who took a piece of meat and he was deciding where to build a hospital. He took two pieces of meat and put it on two different pieces of land. And the piece of meat that lasted the longest on a specific piece of land, he built his hospital there. This for that time was amazing. This for that time was extremely insightful on behalf of Salahuddin. It is at this point in his life that Salahuddin decided to unite the Muslims in Syria and abroad. And for 10 years, Salahuddin Ayyubi started fighting Muslims, trying to unite them. Because he understood that as long as we are disunited, we will be weak. A figure comes into the story at the moment, a figure by the name of Reynald de Chatillon. He was the king of a place called Kerak at the time. And the French, and he was French by the way, but the French had a nickname for him. They called him the Thief Knight. Reynald de Chatillon was a very fervent enemy of the Muslims. Nuruddin Zinki, in actual fact, once captured Reynald de Chatillon and imprisoned him in the dungeons of Damascus. When Salahuddin Ayyubi was busy liberating the Muslim lands from the Muslims and trying to unite them, some of the Muslims actually released this man to be a thorn in the shoe of Salahuddin Ayyubi. As soon as they released this man, he marched to Makkah. He mustered an army and marched to the Hijaz. And what did he say? He said, I'm marching to Medina. And when I get to Medina, I will remove, and may Allah protect us this way, I will remove the camel herder from his grave, meaning the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And I will take him to my palace in Kerak. And I will charge the Muslims to witness his body. This is what this villain has said. When Salahuddin Ayyubi heard what Reynald de Chatillon said, he vowed, he said, by Allah, I will kill Reynald at my own hands. Later on, Reynald perpetrated another travesty. When there was a truce between Salahuddin and the King Baldwin of Jerusalem, Reynald ignored this truce. And at a caravan station near Kerak, he attacked innocent civilians. And he chopped off their heads and he killed them. And before he killed them, he asked each individual, he said, you believe and you revere the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, you revere the Prophet, where is the Prophet to help you now? When Salahuddin Ayyubi heard this, he vowed once again, he said, by Allah, I will kill Reynald with my own hands. Many people have heard about the story of the Battle of Hittin. It was a decisive battle in a place that was about 8 kilometers west of Tiberias in Palestine. At the Battle of Hittin, Salahuddin Ayyubi mustered an army, managed to unite the Muslims of Egypt, of Greater Syria, parts of Iraq and the Hijaz and Yemen. And he brought the fight to the Crusaders. What he did was something that only a military genius would do. What he did was he laid siege to a place called Tiberias. And he knew that if he laid siege to Tiberias, this would draw out the Crusaders into an open field near Hittin. And that is exactly what he did. He drew them out, and when the Crusaders were at Hittin, he knew that Hittin was a very inhospitable environment. It was dry, it was rugged, there was no water. Salahuddin actually poisoned the wells so that the Crusaders could not get water from the wells. And he noticed, as well as the people in his army noticed, that the wind was blowing towards the Crusaders. And what did he do? He started to light the brushwood around the area, the dry grass, the dry bushes. And this came into flame and the smoke started to accumulate, and all the smoke blew into the direction of the Crusaders. And while they were choking on their own on the smoke, they descended from from Hittin, the mount of Hittin, to the horns of Hittin, which was like a plateau, in order to get some water. There, Salahuddin stationed soldiers. They were ready to fight them. And there was a resounding victory at the Battle of Hittin. While the Battle of Hittin was going on, Salahuddin stood with his son next to him. And his son, with the enthusiasm of a youth, said to his father, Dad, Mubarak, you have defeated the Crusaders. Salahuddin said, not yet. And he looked at the tent of the enemy king. And as the fighting proceeded, his son once again said, Mubarak, father, you have defeated the Crusaders. And Salahuddin said, not yet. You see that tent over there? As soon as it falls, that is when we have defeated the Crusaders. And a few moments later, the tent fell. What did Salahuddin Ayyubi do? History bears testament that he descended from his horse and he went into sajda. And what does this tell us about Salahuddin? That during times of difficulty, he remembered Allah. And during times of victory, he remembered Allah. After the great victory of the Battle of Itteen, he asked his soldiers to set up a tent for him, and he invited into the tent the king of Jerusalem at the time, whose name was Guy of Lucerne. He invited him in, and he invited Reynald the Chatelain in as well. Without saying much, without introducing who he was, he extended a cup filled with ice water to Guy of Lucerne as a symbol of peace, as a symbol that he was under his protection. And the Guy of Lucerne drank from the water and passed it on to Reynald the Chatelain, who also drank from the water. At that point, Salahuddin Ayyubi said to Guy of Lucerne, I did not give Reynald the Chatelain water, you did. I have not offered him my protection. At that point, Salahuddin Ayyubi introduced himself to Reynald the Chatelain and told him, reminded him of his transgressions. He said, do you know who I am? I am Salahuddin Ayyubi, and I am the representative of the Prophet Muhammad today. He offered him Islam, which Reynald denied, and he struck him a blow, dislocating his shoulder, and he was finished off, and he fulfilled his vow. I want to just mention an interesting point just prior to him, Salahuddin Ayyubi, entering Jerusalem. Because obviously after the Battle of Itteen, he intended to go into Jerusalem to liberate the Holy Land. The astrologers of the time started to warn him and said, Salahuddin, we warn you by the stars, if you go into Jerusalem, you would lose an eye. Salahuddin Ayyubi said, you talking to me about losing an eye, I swear by Allah, I will enter Jerusalem even if I have to enter Jerusalem blind. This was the quality of the leaders of our history. For 5 days, Salahuddin Ayyubi encircled Jerusalem, finding the pivotal spot from which to enter. The leaders of Jerusalem at the time knew that it was futile. They will not be able to defend the city. Balian came out and asked for terms, and terms meaning a truce that would not lead to bloodshed. After much deliberation, Salahuddin Ayyubi said no to the truce. And Balian then saw that, I need to spice up the deal. And when he went out to Salahuddin, he then threatened to kill the thousands of Muslims within Jerusalem's walls. He threatened to destroy Masjid al-Aqsa and to destroy the Dome of the Rock. And at this, Salahuddin Ayyubi consulted with his associates. And at this, Salahuddin Ayyubi offered him terms. Salahuddin Ayyubi knew, as Mullah Zahir Mahmud said, that the Muslims of Jerusalem, living within the walls of Jerusalem, have been suffering 80 years of persecution under the Crusaders. They were on the front lines, and he did not want them to suffer any longer. On the 27th of Rajab 583 after Hijrah, Salahuddin Ayyubi entered Jerusalem. He entered Jerusalem in a bloodless war. The European historians said when this occurred that Salahuddin Ayyubi showed the Europeans the meaning of compassion. Whose example was Salahuddin Ayyubi taking when he entered into Jerusalem and did not oppress, did not molest, did not harm a single Christian, a single Muslim for that matter? He was taking the example of Umar radiallahu anhu. When Umar radiallahu anhu, during year 15 after Hijrah, when he entered Jerusalem and met the king Suforius, who was the leader of the time, the king said to him, I will only give you the key of Jerusalem if Umar ibn al-Khattab fetches it himself. When Umar radiallahu anhu heard this, he came on a camelback with one servant by his side. And what was customary for Umar radiallahu anhu, he would travel part of the distance on camelback, and then he would let his servant sit on the camelback as well for the rest of the distance. And while he was entering Jerusalem, it was actually the turn of the servant to sit on the camel. So Umar radiallahu anh entered Jerusalem by foot in the mud with dirty clothing with his servant on the back of the camel. When one of his associates asked him, Amirul Mu'mineen, please change your clothes before going into Jerusalem, because you're going to go meet the king of Jerusalem. What did Umar radiallahu anh tell him? He said that we were once a despised nation, referring to the Arabs. We were once a dishonored nation, and Allah Ta'ala gave us honor through Islam. And if we seek honor through any means other than Islam, then Allah Ta'ala will dishonor us again. So he kept his clothes on and he entered. And to this site, Suforius made his famous statement and said, as long as there is a ruler like Umar ibn al-Khattab in Jerusalem, you will never take it. Who made that statement as well? Balian. Balian said the exact same thing to Salahuddin Ayyubi. As long as it's a ruler like Salahuddin Ayyubi, you'll never take it. More than that, and I will end off here. More than that, who was the epitome, which was the epitomical example that Salahuddin was following? And that was the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered Makkah after years of oppression, in a bloodless war once more, one of the Sahaba Sa'ad next to him was overcome with emotion. And what did he say? He said, this is the day, Yawmul Malhamah. This is the day of revenge. This is the day of bloodshed. The Prophet ﷺ stopped him in his tracks and said, O Sa'ad, change that. Change that into, this is the day of mercy. Al-Yawmul Marhamah. Change it. And as Sheikh Hamza Yusuf states, inshallah, when we return the Holy Lands into Muslim hands, once again, may we remember the example of Salahuddin Ayyubi and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah. There's a lot that I still wanted to say, but I think we have to close off now. I would just like to leave you with one last message. With the research that I've done, with the people I've spoken to, with Dr. Ali Salabi's work, it is quite clear that the Crusades have not ended. The French general after World War I went to the qabr of Salahuddin Ayyubi and spoke to a dead man. He said, Salahuddin, we have returned. This is the mortal wound that was inflicted upon the enemies of Islam with the character of Salahuddin Ayyubi. The players are different, but the game is the same. We still have people that are spreading false information, warmongering, still trying to divide us. There are people still trying to exploit the Shia-Sunni split, trying to take advantage of that split. And I ask you just to please remember the advice that Salahuddin gave one of his treasurers when he entered Damascus after liberating Jerusalem. His treasurer constructed a very large palace in Damascus at the time. And when he came in, Salahuddin Ayyubi saw this massive palace, called the treasurer and said, this is not why we are here. He said, we are not being created to spend our lives in Damascus, holding on to the dunya. He stated that what you have done will distract people from their true purpose in life, and that is to proceed in the way of God and to struggle in the way of God. Salahuddin Ayyubi died with 47 dirhams and 1 golden coin to his name. He didn't have any property, no real estate to his name. He had no palaces in his name. He gave it all away prior to his death. This was the king of Egypt, the king of Yemen, the king of Syria, the king of Iraq. 47 dirhams and 1 golden coin. I'll leave you with that, guys. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum to each and everyone. For me, a very happy